Not everything that walks upright is human. For as long as forests have stretched across the land, there have been whispers of others moving within them, shadows that mimic the form of man but do not speak his language, that leave traces in the soil and snow heavier than any known creature. The forest watches. Its canopy blocks the sun. Its roots clutch the earth like the hands of memory. Moss carpets the ground, soft and damp, hiding the passage of feet both living and unseen. Mist coils through the branches and folds over hidden streams, and every sound seems to stretch longer, echoing from places the eye cannot reach. Generations who lived alongside these woods spoke of them in low voices, the wild ones, the watchers, the beings that stood upright yet were not of humankind. They moved through the old growth without haste, leaving signs for those who understood and vanishing from the eyes of those who did not. They were neither spirit nor beast, but a remnant of a world that existed before maps and roads. When settlers arrived, they gave names. They called them Bigfoot or Sasquatch. They left plaster casts of footprints, recorded fleeting images on film, and told tales meant to measure the unmeasurable. Yet long before a name was given, the forests themselves bore witness to shapes that vanished behind fog, to knocks that echoed from hollow logs, to the quiet certainty that something was always observing. Science calls it myth. Belief calls it proof waiting to be found. The forest offers neither judgment nor confirmation. It only gives moments, a shadow crossing the underbrush, a whisper of breath across the leaves, the soft tremor of the earth beneath your boots. Those who listen carefully say the forest remembers. Memory lingers in stone and soil, in water and root, in every unseen movement. Perhaps Bigfoot is not simply a creature of the forest, but a presence that remains unseen, marking the boundary between human and wild. Deep within the oldest forests, where sunlight rarely touches the ground, life moves at its own pace. The soil is layered with centuries of decay, needles, and fallen leaves, carrying the memory of storms and fire. Rivers wind quietly through the undergrowth, their surfaces interrupted by rocks worn smooth or by roots clutching the banks like the hands of long-forgotten giants. These forests existed long before the first humans arrived, and they shaped those who would come to walk among them, both man and the stories that would become legend. The creature that modern culture names Bigfoot has long existed beyond maps or written record, remembered and described in the oral tradition of those who lived close to the vast, untamed wilderness. For the peoples who called these forests home, the wild ones were not mere tales. They were part of the environment itself. They were markers, warnings, and mirrors, embodiments of the dangers and sanctity of the woods. To speak of them was not to embellish, but to recognize that the forest had its own rules, its own guardians, and its own memory. Among the tribes of the Pacific and interior regions, the Saskats, or wild men, were described in precise detail, though often differently by each storyteller. Some spoke of beings taller than the tallest man, their hair thick and dark, their eyes reflecting the dim light like a flicker of flame. Others emphasized the weight of their presence, a soundless step across the forest floor, a rustle in the branches that could stop a heartbeat without warning. All accounts agreed upon one point. They were not human, yet they shared the upright gait, the form and posture of man. They belonged to the forest as much as the moss, the cedar, and the fog. It is tempting to interpret these descriptions as exaggeration, the products of imagination or fear. Yet, when one considers the intimate relationship between humans and wilderness in early times, it becomes evident that such stories served practical as well as moral purposes. The forest was as dangerous as it was bountiful, offering sustenance, water, and shelter, but also hiding predators, traps, and the unknown. By personifying the danger, the tribes could convey the lessons of survival, the respect required for the land, and the unspoken consequences of trespassing too far from the known path. The wild ones were part teacher, part warning, part living embodiment of the forest's own consciousness. The geography of these regions helped to shape the myth as much as culture did. The mountains rose abruptly, carved from ancient volcanic activity, their slopes steep and treacherous. Valleys were thick with evergreens and fog that could swallow the traveler whole. Rivers ran cold and deep, carrying the chill of snowmelt from peaks that rarely thawed. In the winter months, snow blanketed the ground in unbroken white, erasing tracks and masking the presence of creatures both known and unknown. In these conditions, footprints too broad for any human, and sounds untraceable to any animal, could spark the imagination of a people living in constant proximity to the rawness of nature. European settlers later encountered the forests and the stories in fragmented form, through trade and observation. The creatures were not named initially, but the reactions of the tribes were recorded with fascination and fear. The settlers noted the warnings, the rituals, the avoidance of certain areas, and the descriptions of beings that moved like man but were not man. Over time, these tales merged with European folkloric traditions of wild men, hairy hermits, and forest spirits, creating a hybridized myth that would evolve into the modern conception of Bigfoot. The 19th century saw the first documented sightings that approached the language of science, though still framed in folklore. Miners, hunters, and trappers wrote of enormous footprints pressed into soft soil, of hair snagged on branches, of the distant sound of pounding or knocking that seemed deliberate. These accounts were treated with skepticism in newspapers, yet they persisted, repeated across decades and locations. The consistency of description suggests that the stories were grounded not only in imagination but in repeated observation, each witness responding to phenomena that resisted explanation. The physical environment reinforced the myth. In dense forests, perception is limited. Shadows stretch and twist, and every motion in the periphery can be mistaken for something more substantial. Mist and fog obscure vision, carrying sound irregularly, creating echoes and distortions. The smell of decaying vegetation, of animal musk, of waterlogged soil, all combine into an atmosphere where the ordinary can become uncanny. It is a landscape that naturally encourages attention to subtle movements, where the forest itself seems to watch, and where a fleeting shadow can be remembered as proof of a presence beyond understanding. Folklore also tied the wild ones to moral and ethical lessons. Tales of those who disrespected the forest, who hunted recklessly, or who ignored warnings, often ended with encounters that were frightening or dangerous. Sometimes the stories implied that the wild ones observed and judged human behavior, enforcing boundaries the forest itself could not articulate. The creatures became symbols of restraint and respect, embodiments of the forest's authority. They were never evil in these tales, but they were formidable, and they commanded attention. Language played a central role in transmitting the legend. Names, terms, and epithets differed between tribes and regions, yet the core description remained similar: a being upright, covered in hair, moving silently through the trees, leaving evidence of its existence in tracks and broken branches. This linguistic variation allowed the myth to survive migration, displacement, and cultural change, while maintaining a recognizable identity. It was flexible enough to absorb new elements, yet resilient enough to remain anchored in the forest itself. The modern myth owes much to this foundation. The persistence of the forest, the continuity of human habitation, and the enduring presence of unexplained phenomena created fertile ground for Bigfoot to emerge not only as folklore, but as a cultural icon. The forest leaves traces of every presence, visible to those who know how to read them. Footprints pressed into soft soil, impressions in snow, broken branches, bent reeds, tufts of hair caught on bark. These are the markers of beings both known and unknown. From the earliest human dwellers to the explorers who penetrated the deep wilderness centuries later, such signs were noticed, recorded, and passed down. They became evidence, but also cautionary reminders that the land was never empty. Indigenous accounts of the Saskats emphasized its physical traces. The footprints were often described as enormous, proportionate to a towering body, with toes that left faint impressions, suggesting a structure both similar and unfamiliar to human anatomy. These impressions were not always clear, sometimes distorted by mud or snow, yet they carried a weight that left no doubt in the observer's mind. Something large had walked here, deliberately, and with purpose. Storytellers would recount finding such tracks near streams where the creature drank, or along ridges where it had passed unseen. Often, these narratives included the feeling that the tracks were arranged as if the observer were being guided or warned by the presence itself. Early European explorers and settlers began to encounter similar signs. Miners, trappers, and surveyors in the 19th century reported impressions in the snow or mud, some exceeding 16 inches in length, with a breadth that suggested immense strength. These accounts, recorded in journals and occasionally in local newspapers, spoke of impressions that disappeared abruptly, leading into dense underbrush, or ended near a riverbank where no clear path continued. Some noted the unusual gait suggested by stride length and the occasional partial imprint of heel and toe, evidence that the walker was upright but not fully human in proportion. Sightings were rarer, but no less compelling. One account from the 1840s described a solitary figure moving between fir trees at dusk, its motion deliberate and swift, leaving witnesses frozen in disbelief. In the Pacific Northwest, a settler recorded seeing a man-shaped shadow carrying something across a clearing, only to vanish when approached. Other reports detailed encounters at night or at the edge of fog, when the shape of the forest itself seemed to shift around the presence. In many indigenous narratives, such sightings were accompanied by a sense of recognition and respect, the forest itself seeming to acknowledge the witness. Evidence did not always take visible form. Sounds became as important as prints. Knocking on trees, the break of a branch, or the distant crash of a large body moving through brush were noted repeatedly. These auditory markers, consistent across regions and time periods, suggested deliberate movement and awareness of the observer. Indigenous accounts often interpreted these sounds as communication or warning, while settlers frequently dismissed them as coincidence, the product of imagination or wind. Yet across the centuries, such reports have persisted and patterns emerge. Knocks follow a rhythm, steps fall heavy and uneven, and the forest responds in ways that feel intentional. Physical traces also included hair and other biological material. In rare cases, strands of dark, coarse hair were recovered, caught on thorns or branches, and examined for clues. These hairs did not match known local fauna exactly. Even when modern analysis was applied, no conclusive identification could be made, leaving the material as tantalizing proof of a creature present, yet unclassified. Such findings reinforced both indigenous and settler observations, lending credibility to the notion that the forest harbored beings that had not yet entered the scientific record. Throughout the 20th century, the myth of Bigfoot became entwined with popular culture, yet the physical evidence continued to accumulate in subtle forms. Plaster casts of footprints became common in the mid-1900s, capturing impressions too large for any known human or bear. Some casts revealed dermal ridges and patterns suggestive of living tissue, though debate over authenticity was relentless. Films and photographs occasionally captured fleeting glimpses, dark shapes crossing clearings, reflections of eyes in low light, or the shimmer of hair in sun-dappled mist. Each piece of evidence was debated, analyzed, and often dismissed, yet collectively they painted a consistent pattern. Something substantial moved through these forests, leaving signs too regular to be entirely coincidental. Reports from around the continent reveal similar patterns. From the interior forests of Canada to the dense woodlands of the Pacific Northwest, footprints, hair, and sound-based evidence recur with remarkable consistency. The size, shape, and placement of footprints suggest a bipedal being of considerable mass. Hair samples remain difficult to classify. Auditory phenomena are reported with frequency, particularly at dusk and dawn, when human senses are most attuned to subtle changes in the environment. Even skeptics note that the repetition of these details across independent witnesses, regions, and decades is extraordinary. Skepticism has always been a part of the story. Hoaxes and misidentifications complicate the record. Bears walking upright, large elk, and human trickery have all been suggested as explanations for footprints and sightings. Some photographs and films have been debunked. Yet the persistence of reports, many originating from trained outdoorsmen and those intimately familiar with the forest, cannot be ignored. The pattern of evidence, when viewed over time and space, suggests more than coincidence, and certainly more than the invention of the imagination alone. The forests themselves play a role in preserving the mystery. Dense undergrowth, fog, and steep terrain ensure that even the largest creature can remain largely unseen. Seasonal changes alter the landscape, masking tracks and movements. The forest does not yield its secrets easily, and human attempts to penetrate its depths often encounter only the faintest traces of what may exist. It is a terrain suited to the elusive nature of Bigfoot, where the observer is always challenged to distinguish between perception and presence. Beyond physical evidence, the stories themselves carry a type of verification. Indigenous oral histories, settler journals, and modern accounts all describe similar behaviors. Avoidance of humans, travel along ridges and streams, nocturnal activity, and the ability to traverse difficult terrain without leaving a permanent trace. These consistencies suggest not only an enduring legend, but a being whose behavior has been shaped by the forest, whose patterns are repeated with remarkable fidelity across time and space. The human response to evidence is as revealing as the evidence itself. Fear, awe, skepticism, and fascination combine to create a culture around Bigfoot. Footprints spark exploration. Sounds inspire stories. Hair and casts generate debate. Scientific studies, while limited, attempt to impose order on phenomena that resist full documentation. Yet the more humans pursue certainty, the more the forest and its inhabitants maintain ambiguity. The creature eludes definitive capture, leaving only traces and testimony. To walk through these forests is to encounter the traces of the unknown, to witness evidence that challenges perception, and to recognize that the wilderness holds beings both real and enduring. Each footprint in mud or snow, each rustle in the branches, and each sighting at dusk contributes to a narrative older than settlement. Bigfoot, in this sense, is both creature and mirror, reflecting the forest's power and humanity's persistent wonder. The human fascination with such creatures is ancient. In every corner of the world where wilderness endures, people have recorded encounters with beings that stand upright, possess great strength, and inhabit the liminal space between civilization and the untamed. Some of these beings are celebrated in myth and legend, others feared, and many are treated with skepticism by outsiders. Yet the persistence of reports across generations and geographies suggests that humans have long recognized entities that are neither human nor fully animal. While Bigfoot is perhaps the most well-known of these creatures, it is far from unique. In other parts of the world, there are beings whose stories echo the traits observed in North America. Across cultures, time, and terrain, the ape men endure as shadows, reminders of the wild, and testament to the persistence of the unknown. From the snowbound peaks of the Himalayas to the remote mountains of Australia, from the forests of Central Asia to the jungles of Sumatra, human eyes have glimpsed figures moving through the trees, leaving behind traces that confound, astonish, and endure. High among the peaks of the Himalayas, where the air is thin and the wind scours the rock and snow, the world is stripped to its rawest form. Here, human habitation is scarce, confined to scattered villages clinging to valleys and plateaus, while the mountains stretch in endless, jagged ridges, glaciers carving their way through ancient stone. It is in these spaces, inhospitable and merciless, that the legend of the Yeti has endured, whispered from generation to generation, from Sherpas to nomadic herders, their voices carrying over frozen passes and along icy streams. The Yeti, often called the abominable snowman, is described in the local tongue as Meto Kangmi, the man-bear of the mountains, a creature both feared and respected. Its form is said to be massive, covered in coarse hair, often white or gray, blending with snow and rock. Observers report a stature towering over the tallest human, moving upright with a deliberate gait, each step measured, leaving footprints deep in snow that vanish abruptly into the slope or ice. The size and spacing of these tracks speak of immense weight and strength, yet the creature seems to move without haste, attuned to the rhythms of its harsh environment. Stories of encounters are preserved in oral histories. Sherpas speak of strange sounds echoing through valleys at night, the cracking of distant ice, the knocking of large bodies against stone, the faint rustle of something moving along cliff faces. Herds of yaks, essential to the survival of mountain communities, are sometimes found agitated or scattered, their tracks leading into areas where humans dare not follow. The Yeti is not merely a physical presence. It occupies a place in the spiritual landscape of the Himalayas, revered and feared in equal measure. Local legends describe the creature as a guardian of the mountains, punishing those who disrespect sacred passes or the fragile balance of nature. Some stories suggest that the Yeti has the power to appear and vanish at will, a specter that moves through snow and mist, a symbol of forces larger than humans can comprehend. To ignore these tales is to disregard the wisdom of those who have lived for generations under the shadow of the peaks. Sightings have varied in detail yet share remarkable consistency. Travelers recount glimpses of a massive, hair-covered figure moving across distant ridges, sometimes reflected in icy streams or glimpsed through the drifting fog of a snowstorm. Observers describe the Yeti's gait as deliberate and upright, each step calculated to conserve energy in an environment that demands efficiency. The creature appears to avoid humans deliberately, yet curiosity or proximity sometimes results in brief encounters, fleeting and unforgettable. Physical evidence has been collected sporadically. Hair samples, some gray, some white, occasionally black, have been recovered from campsites or found snagged on branches. Analysis often yields inconclusive results, with comparisons to known fauna failing to match exactly. Photographs, though scarce, sometimes reveal dark, upright shapes moving along mountain slopes. Audio recordings capture deep, resonant sounds that cannot be explained by wind or wildlife. The evidence is fragmentary, yet it is consistent enough to suggest that a large, bipedal creature persists in these highlands. The Yeti's habitat shapes both its behavior and its myth. The Himalayan environment is unforgiving. Temperatures fall far below freezing, and storms can appear without warning. Food is scarce, and the terrain is steep and treacherous. Survival requires strength, endurance, and intimate knowledge of the land. Any creature living here must be exceptionally adapted, capable of navigating cliffs, glaciers, and snowfields, and finding sustenance where others see only desolation. The Yeti is said to move with ease through these conditions, leaving traces in snow that are quickly obscured by wind and frost, contributing to its elusive reputation. Cultural accounts often emphasize morality and balance. Tales warn of travelers who venture carelessly into high passes, of hunters who disregard the sanctity of the land, and of those who fail to respect the rhythms of the mountains. The Yeti appears as a figure enforcing these unspoken rules, a living testament to the authority of the wilderness. Observers often interpret fleeting interactions as warnings or lessons, reinforcing a relationship between humans and the mountains that is as much ethical as it is physical. Throughout the 20th century, mountaineers and scientists mounted expeditions to find the Yeti, seeking footprints, hair, scat, or other signs. Though no definitive capture has occurred, footprints continue to be reported in remote passes, and local guides recount stories of sightings or disturbances along their routes. These accounts are treated with varying degrees of skepticism, yet patterns emerge: the size and shape of footprints, the timing of sightings during early morning or late afternoon, and the tendency of the creature to inhabit certain valleys and ridges consistently over decades. In examining these reports, one notices parallels with other upright forest dwellers. Like Bigfoot, the Yeti appears to maintain distance from humans, leaving behind only traces of its existence. Its form and movement are familiar, yet the scale and environment set it apart. The creature's presence is simultaneously physical and narrative, occupying both the terrain and the imagination, serving as a reminder that even in the harshest environments, life persists beyond human understanding. Deep within the remote ranges and forests of eastern Australia, where the eucalyptus rises thick and the ground is layered with fallen leaves and brittle twigs, there exists a being that has eluded human understanding for centuries. Known to Aboriginal peoples as the Yowie, this creature is described as a towering, hairy figure, moving upright with an imposing presence, a silent observer of those who traverse its domain. Aboriginal oral tradition preserves detailed accounts of the Yowie. Elders speak of the creature with respect and caution, noting its immense strength, agility, and knowledge of the land. It inhabits the thick scrub, valleys, and gorges, places where human passage is difficult and observation nearly impossible. Stories warn of encounters with Yowies, describing footprints that appear overnight in soft earth, trees knocked or bent as if brushed by great hands, and eerie, low vocalizations echoing through the hollows. These accounts are rarely sensationalized. They are warnings, lessons in caution and respect, and records of interactions with the unseen wilderness. European settlers first became aware of the Yowie in the 18th and 19th centuries. Explorers, surveyors, and later settlers recorded sightings of large, upright creatures in dense forests, often at dawn or dusk when the light was low and visibility limited. One such account from the 1860s tells of a man crossing a ridge when he glimpsed a towering, hair-covered figure moving swiftly through the undergrowth. He froze, unable to comprehend the scale or presence, before the creature vanished into the trees. These early reports, combined with indigenous knowledge, formed the foundation of a persistent legend. The Yowie's appearance is consistently described across regions. Witnesses note a muscular, human-like form, often exceeding 7 feet in height, with broad shoulders and limbs covered in dark hair. The gait is upright but deliberate, the movement capable of rapid bursts when necessary. Footprints are frequently reported, ranging from 16 to 20 inches in length, with wide toe placement and impressions suggesting great weight. In many cases, these tracks are found in remote areas, far from human habitation, disappearing as suddenly as they appear. Sounds are as telling as footprints. Observers describe low, guttural noises, tree branches breaking under unseen weight, and rustling that seems too purposeful to be caused by wind or smaller wildlife. Aboriginal accounts often interpret these auditory markers as communication or warning. The Yowie is regarded not as a predator but as a sentinel of the forest, ensuring the balance of the environment is maintained and that humans respect the limits of their intrusion. The habitat of the Yowie shapes its behavior. Eucalyptus forests, rugged mountain ranges, and gorges provide natural cover, allowing the creature to remain largely undetected. Seasonal variation affects movement. During periods of food scarcity, Yowies are said to traverse valleys and ridges more frequently, leaving signs in areas otherwise considered inhospitable. Streams, rock overhangs, and hidden clearings serve as both pathways and shelter, their locations passed down through Aboriginal knowledge. These patterns suggest a deep understanding of the land, a familiarity born of generations, and a life lived entirely in concert with the environment. The Yowie exists not merely as a physical entity, but as a cultural symbol. In Aboriginal storytelling, it embodies the authority of the wilderness, the need for balance, and the consequences of human disrespect. It is a being that mediates between humans and the untamed forest, appearing when boundaries are threatened and retreating when they are acknowledged. To encounter a Yowie, even fleetingly, is to be reminded of the forest's dominance and the presence of forces beyond ordinary perception. Throughout Australia's colonial and post-colonial history, the Yowie has resisted scientific categorization. Expeditions to locate or capture it have produced footprints, anecdotal evidence, and photographs, yet no definitive specimen has been recovered. The forests themselves conceal, shelter, and protect, ensuring that the creature remains largely unseen. Each trace contributes to a narrative that is as much about human humility as it is about the presence of an unknown species. The Yowie shares many traits with other global ape men. Upright posture, large size, forested habitat, avoidance of humans, and a blend of physical and narrative presence are recurring features. Yet its uniqueness is rooted in the Australian landscape, the eucalyptus forests, the gorges, and the cultural lens through which it is viewed. Its legend is inseparable from the terrain and from the people who have lived alongside it for centuries. Encounters with the Yowie, whether by Aboriginal elders or modern observers, continue to inspire wonder and caution. The forests echo with the footsteps of beings that remain largely hidden, their presence inferred from traces, sightings, and the persistence of stories. The Yowie's endurance demonstrates a pattern repeated across continents. A large, bipedal, forest-dwelling creature, existing at the boundary between the known and the unknown. Across the remote highlands and forests of Central Asia, through Mongolia, the Altai Mountains, and the endless steppes, there are accounts of an ape-man called the Almas, upright, covered in hair, and elusive, moving through rugged terrain where human settlement is rare and survival is precarious. Indigenous peoples of the region, from the Mongols to the various Turkic tribes, have long preserved stories of the Almas. They speak of it as a wild man, smaller in stature than Bigfoot or the Yeti, yet powerful and formidable. It is said to dwell in caves, forested valleys, and isolated highlands. Its form is described as human-like but primitive, with coarse hair covering the body, broad shoulders, and limbs suited to climbing, running, and surviving in the harsh terrain. Reports emphasize both the physical and behavioral qualities of the Almas. Witnesses recount seeing the creature forage for roots, fruit, or small animals, moving with remarkable agility. Footprints, sometimes preserved in mud, show a bipedal gait, wide toe spacing, and impressions indicating weight greater than an ordinary human. In some cases, tracks lead for miles through rugged terrain, abruptly disappearing into rocky outcrops, dense undergrowth, or caves. These traces, combined with fleeting sightings, have persisted across generations, forming a consistent pattern of observation. Historical records from Russian explorers, 19th century anthropologists, and local travelers provide additional accounts. Expeditions into Siberia and Mongolia reported footprints of unusual size and shape, human-like in proportion yet larger, sometimes accompanied by hair or scat. Observers noted the creature's avoidance of humans, its ability to traverse difficult terrain with ease, and its nocturnal or crepuscular habits. Some accounts included brief encounters, glimpses of a shadowy figure watching from a ridge, retreating silently into the trees, leaving only the rustle of foliage behind. The Almas occupies a unique space between human and animal in local culture. Stories describe it as fiercely independent, a being that lives outside the social structures of humanity yet displays intelligence and awareness. Folktales warn of approaching its territory carelessly, emphasizing that it is capable of defending itself, yet rarely confronts humans directly. This duality, fearsome yet elusive, pervades both indigenous accounts and those of explorers, reinforcing the sense of a creature that exists at the edge of understanding. Physical evidence, while limited, has been documented. Footprints measured in the late 1800s and early 1900s range from 12 to 16 inches in length, with clear impressions of toes and heels, suggesting a structure distinct from known regional animals. Hair samples have been recovered, coarse and dark, occasionally with color variations that blend with the forest or steppe. Sound plays an important role in Almas accounts. Nomadic herders recount hearing the creature at night, especially in areas where livestock graze near the edge of forests or foothills. These auditory markers, combined with physical traces, form a consistent pattern of observation across different communities, linking past and present encounters. Despite modern technology, cameras, and motion sensors, sightings remain rare and fleeting. The creature's persistence in oral histories and eyewitness reports, however, suggests an entity both elusive and enduring, occupying a space that resists complete documentation. The Almas mirrors global patterns observed in Bigfoot, the Yeti, and the Yowie. Upright posture, bipedal gait, forested or rugged habitat, avoidance of humans, and the interplay between physical traces and narrative persistence are recurring features. On the island of Sumatra, where dense tropical rainforest stretches for miles, dripping with humidity and heavy with the scent of earth and decaying foliage, there is a being known as the orang Pendek, the short person. Unlike its towering cousins in other continents, this creature is smaller in stature, often described as standing between 3 and 5 feet tall, yet it moves with the same quiet, deliberate grace that defines other ape men. Its body is covered in dark hair, its limbs strong and agile, adapted for climbing, running, and navigating the forest undergrowth with ease. The orang Pendek has been known to the local Sumatran tribes for generations. Folktales describe it as a shy, intelligent creature, adept at avoiding humans, yet observant, leaving traces that reveal its presence. Footprints pressed into soft mud, broken twigs, and flattened undergrowth mark its passage. Villagers speak of hearing rustling in the canopy at night, or the soft crack of a branch under weight too great for any known small animal. These signs, though subtle, are consistent and widely recognized among those who live closest to the forest. Western attention to the orang Pendek began in the 20th century. Explorers, naturalists, and later cryptozoologists recorded sightings, tracks, and anecdotal evidence from villagers. One report from the 1920s tells of a small, upright figure crossing a clearing at dawn, its head low and movement deliberate. Footprints discovered nearby were human-like in shape, yet too small and proportioned differently than those of ordinary humans. Similar reports continued into the 21st century, forming a persistent pattern of observation. The creature's behavior is consistently described across accounts. It appears to avoid humans deliberately, retreating into dense foliage or climbing into trees when approached. Its diet is thought to include fruit, small animals, and forest vegetation, with foraging often occurring near streams or forest clearings. Tracks are most often found after rain, preserved in soft mud and occasionally plastered for study. The orang Pendek's environment shapes its elusive nature. The Sumatran rainforest is dense, humid, and layered with multiple canopies, making observation difficult. The creature's agility, combined with intimate knowledge of the terrain, allows it to remain largely undetected despite frequent human activity in some areas. Villagers report that even those who spend their lives in the forest rarely encounter the orang pendek directly, yet its traces are evident to those trained to notice them. Stories from local tribes often imbue the creature with spiritual significance. It is sometimes regarded as a guardian of the forest, a being that maintains balance and punishes those who exploit or disrespect the land. Tales emphasize its intelligence, awareness, and ability to vanish when observed, reinforcing its status as a being both physical and symbolic, a reminder of the forest's power and mystery. Modern expeditions continue to document signs of the orang pendek. Photographs, video recordings, and plaster casts of footprints have been collected, though definitive proof remains elusive. Researchers note patterns in tracks, feeding areas, and auditory signs, connecting them to long-standing indigenous knowledge. The consistency of reports, combined with the difficulty of the terrain, suggests a persistent, bipedal inhabitant whose existence is both tangible and enigmatic. In this, the orang pendek connects to the broader tapestry of upright forest dwellers. Like its counterparts, it exists at the intersection of the physical and the narrative, tangible yet mysterious. It is shaped by its environment, by centuries of human observation, and by the enduring mysteries of the forests it inhabits. For centuries, humans have tried to understand the silhouette in the woods, the impressions of immense footprints in soil and snow, the fleeting glimpses of a massive, upright figure in the distance. Scholars, explorers, and storytellers alike have sought to explain the phenomenon, blending observation, folklore, and theory. Among the earliest ideas is the reflection of evolutionary memory, an echo of creatures once real, now extinct, leaving traces in human imagination as much as in the wilderness itself. Gigantopithecus, a giant primate that roamed the forests of Asia, stands as one of the most cited ancestral candidates. Fossilized teeth, jaw fragments, and skeletal remnants suggest a being of immense stature, capable of upright posture, or at least bipedal balance. Some scientists speculate that these creatures, living tens of thousands of years ago, may have crossed paths with early humans or left a genetic and psychological imprint that survived in myth. Footprints, stories of shadowy figures in remote forests, and the human instinct to recognize humanoid forms may all echo this distant memory. Neanderthal memory provides another lens. Their robust frames, heavy brows, and deep-set eyes resonate with the images reported in Bigfoot sightings. The creature appears familiar and alien at once, a mirror of a humanity unbound by society, tools, and law. Its presence evokes the wilderness that humans abandoned when we chose settlement, agriculture, and the rhythms of civilization. In forests, mountains, and valleys, we may be seeing not a new species, but a reflection of ourselves, walking upright in isolation, unconcerned with human order. Psychology and anthropology intertwine further. Humans are predisposed to recognize patterns, faces, and forms, especially humanoid shapes, in their environment. This cognitive tendency, known as pareidolia, can magnify fleeting glimpses into full-bodied encounters. A shadow, the flicker of movement among trees, or a distant silhouette against mist may trigger recognition of a humanoid form, interpreted through the lens of ancient memory and cultural expectation. In this sense, Bigfoot may exist as much in the mind as in the forest, a projection of subconscious fears, hopes, and ancestral memory. Yet these sightings are not purely imagined. The consistency of reports across regions and generations, the repeated discovery of tracks too large or unusual for known animals, and the occasional recovery of hair or scat that defies clear identification all suggest there is something physical prompting these stories. Some scientists propose misidentifications of known animals, such as bears standing upright, orangutans, or large primates outside their known range. Others point to a combination of environmental factors: fog, shadows, shifting light, and dense undergrowth that can transform ordinary objects into extraordinary shapes when viewed briefly or from a distance. Another explanation lies in atavistic symbolism. Bigfoot may function as a cultural archetype, a mirror ancestor that represents what humans lost in adopting civilization. Its upright posture, immense size, and strength serve as reminders of primal capabilities, the instinctive connection to the wilderness, and the survival skills no longer necessary in urbanized life. Witnesses may unconsciously project these qualities onto ambiguous stimuli in the environment, blending perception with deep-seated evolutionary and cultural memory. Some theorists suggest the possibility of a relict hominid population, surviving from prehistoric times in isolated forests and mountains. Fossil records indicate multiple species of large primates once existed, some capable of bipedal locomotion, and the vastness of North American wilderness or remote forests of Asia and Australia could theoretically support small populations. Footprints, hair samples, and occasional photographs lend tentative support to this theory, though definitive proof remains elusive. The absence of bodies, skeletal remains, or verified DNA samples complicates the matter, yet the persistence of sightings suggests something continues to occupy the forests in ways that evade human detection. The cultural dimension cannot be overlooked. Bigfoot functions as a repository of human fears and fascination with the unknown. It embodies the tension between civilization and wilderness, knowledge and mystery, human and non-human. Folklore, eyewitness testimony, and the media reinforce its presence in collective consciousness, shaping perception as much as observation. Even skeptics acknowledge a pattern. Stories endure where wilderness persists. Sightings cluster in regions with minimal human intrusion, and the creature is consistently described as large, upright, and covered in hair. Ultimately, the figure of Bigfoot occupies multiple spaces simultaneously: the physical, the psychological, and the symbolic. It is at once a potential species, a projection of human cognition, and a reflection of what was relinquished when humans turned away from the forest. To encounter it, even fleetingly, is to confront the shadow of ourselves, the ancestral memory walking beside us, a reminder that the unknown persists where human influence is diminished, and that the wild holds echoes of what we once were. Each trace is evidence, partial and enigmatic, pointing to something real or something imagined, or perhaps both. The forest becomes a stage for interaction between human perception and the persistence of the unknown, and in this stage, Bigfoot emerges as a living testament to the intersection of biology, psychology, and myth. Modern encounters, scientific inquiry, and continued observation converge in a single point. The wilderness of North America, and perhaps other regions, harbors an unknown presence. Whether a surviving relict hominid, an undiscovered primate, or a collective projection of human memory and imagination, Bigfoot remains a figure that challenges understanding. Footprints, hair, sounds, and fleeting glimpses all testify to the persistence of something extraordinary, moving quietly beyond the reach of ordinary observation. Even as technology advances, motion-activated cameras, DNA sampling, and ecological study, the creature remains elusive. Its persistence challenges scientific methods, defies complete classification, and continues to evoke wonder, fear, and curiosity. Bigfoot is more than a collection of sightings, hair samples, and plastered footprints. It is a mirror, reflecting humanity's fascination with the untamed, the unknown, and the ancestral. It reminds us of the lives once lived in harmony with the wild, of instincts and abilities no longer necessary in a world of roads, cities, and civilization. In its elusiveness, it preserves the wilderness itself, demanding respect for what cannot be fully grasped or owned. Across continents and cultures, its counterparts, Yeti, Yowie, Almas, Orang Pendek, share similar forms, behaviors, and symbolism. Each represents a boundary, a threshold where the known meets the unknowable, where human understanding confronts mystery. The persistence of these beings suggests a continuity in human imagination, observation, and cultural memory, a thread connecting ancient oral traditions to modern encounters. Scientific tools may advance, cameras may capture fleeting images, and footprints may be measured and analyzed, yet the creature continues to evade certainty. This elusiveness is part of its nature. Bigfoot exists in the liminal spaces, between shadow and substance, fear and fascination, the forest and the human mind. It endures not merely as a hypothesis or legend, but as a living question, a presence that defies explanation yet demands acknowledgement. To encounter Bigfoot, even in imagination, is to step closer to the wild, to confront the mystery of a world not entirely subdued by human hands. It is a reminder that even as knowledge expands, some presences remain just beyond comprehension. In these silent forests, the figure moves, always upright, always watching, a shadow of the past, a guardian of the untamed, a mirror of ourselves.